All praises, all praises, all praises to the heavenly, holy, almighty creator of infinity, eternity, the universe, and all there is. This is Revelations.Unveiled. Detroit. Hello, family. We are back together again, convening and converging so that we may once again sit at the wonderful knee of the wine of wisdom. And we shall be reviewing once again in the spirit of our reparations revolution for the American descendants of the enslaved, or better yet said, the Israelite American descendants of the enslaved. And so, family, my continued petitions and prayer for the 12 tribes of the house of Jacob, as well as the brothers and sisters of the world, wherever we may sojourn, so that we may continue to persevere, endure, and overcome in this carnal existence. And so, family, came across an article recently in which it is a personal conversation between a sitting president and a future president of the United States of America, as well as gives you a spiritual insight as to our current sitting president, so-called number 45. And so, in the spirit of our reparations revolution, we get a chance now, family, to do a spiritual evaluation of the language, of the tone, of the sentiment, of the sensibility, of the tolerance, of the overall attitude of the elected leaders of the nation that is so only designated to the one who gains the most popular vote, thus translating into capturing the majority of the electoral college. So these presidents are representatives. And so, family, as we gauge the tone and the temperament of the chief executive officer of the administrative arm of our government system, maybe we can understand how some of the politics are not represented in terms of the betterment, the increase, or the prosperity of the American descendants of the enslaved. Maybe we can get an understanding of the barrier to the reparations revolution. And so this is for an increase of understanding of both our carnal existence and our spiritual growth. And so the title of this article is Reagan's Racist Call Within President Nixon Released from Archives. And this was scribed, or the aspects of the article were by an ex-Reagan library director, and the article was penned by a Miss Kate Sullivan of CNN. And so we begin. In a newly unearthed audio clip, then California Governor Ronald Reagan disparaged monkeys from African countries in a phone call with the then President Richard Nixon, according to the former director of Nixon's Presidential Library, who published his findings in The Atlantic. Tim Naftali, who directed the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum from 2007 to 2011, writes that Reagan, who would later become the 40th President of the United States, called Nixon in October 1971, the day after the United Nations had voted to recognize the People's Republic of China. In the call, he says, Reagan is heard apparently referencing the way the Tanzanian delegation started dancing in the General Assembly when the UN took the vote to seat the delegation from Beijing instead of Taiwan. Reagan, Naftali writes, is heard saying to Nixon, "Last night, I tell you, to watch that thing on television as I did? Nixon interjected. Yeah. Reagan continued. To see those monkeys from those African countries. Damn them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes. Reagan, a devoted defender of Taiwan who despised the UN, wanted the U.S. to withdraw from full participation, Naftali said. The National Archives originally released the tape of the phone call in 2000 without the racist portion. But as a researcher, Naftali said, he requested a new review of Nixon's conversations with Reagan last year, 2018. The National Archives released the complete version of the recording online 2 weeks ago. In another audio clip, Naftali writes, Nixon then called then Secretary of State William Rogers and recounted his conversation with Reagan. As you can imagine, Nixon told Rogers, there's strong feeling that we just shouldn't. As Reagan said, he saw these cannibals on television last night and he says, Christ, they weren't even wearing shoes. And here, the United States is going to submit its fate to that, and so forth and so on. The newly unearthed audio comes weeks after President Donald Trump used racist language to attack 4 progressive Democratic congresswomen of color, implying they weren't American, and suggesting they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came. Wow. So family, we have former President Nixon who is espousing to his confidant and calling the peoples of Africa, more specifically the Tanzanian delegation, cannibals. And he's referencing the emotion from former President, then Governor Ronald Reagan, who called them monkeys who were not used to wearing shoes. So we have a president referring to cannibals and a governor referring to monkeys, labels designated for African nation political representatives. Cannibalistic monkeys, Nixon and Reagan. We continue. The president faced swift backlash from both Democrats and Republicans, speaking of Donald Trump, and the House voted to formally condemn Trump's racist language. Okay, so they're trying to liken Donald Trump and his language to that. Or no, they're trying to, I guess, say Trump is the racist, the ultimate racist, because of his statements and how he is addressing the political representatives of America. We have, Congressman Cummings, and then the 4 lady representatives who they've now called the squad. And so because of Trump's rhetoric, now they're engaging in formal denouncements and votes and censures and proclamations against our president. Well, for some of us who like to do an overall evaluation of the totality of our American political system, when you measure the speeches and the actions of our quote-unquote politicians, and we get a review of both or all the parties. So we have the Democrats, we have the Republicans, the Libertarians, the Green parties, whoever Mr. Bernie Sanders represents in terms of his socialist party concepts, they're all the same. If you follow the money to the top, you're going to run into some elderly Caucasian male. So all of the parties are represented by the same type, and the influence that they represent are the same type. So you're going, hey, you have the rich, the privileged, the paternal elements who created this government still representing this government. And so their sentiments as it pertains to females or women, as well as other ethnic groups is very telling into their actions and the laws that are passed. And we shall continue. For some, Reagan's words still come as a surprise. Ronald Reagan, America's 40th president, is perhaps most fondly remembered as the former B-movie actor turned swaggering hero of the conservative right. But it shouldn't be a surprise. Okay, so we had Nixon, who was conservative, and we have Reagan, who's conservative, and Donald Trump, who's conservative. If all of this sounds depressingly familiar, it should. President Donald Trump's tenure in the White House remains most notable for his consistent attacks on black and brown people, Americans, and global citizens through rhetoric that has demonized and dehumanized entire populations, countries, regions, and cities, with the city of Baltimore being the only latest target. Now back to Ronald Reagan. In the 60s, Reagan tried to suppress teaching and protests by figures on the black left like Angela Davis, Eldridge Cleveland, and student protesters at San Francisco State and elsewhere. He also famously supported a ban on open carry for loaded firearms as governor of California, only after the Black Panthers publicly asserted their right to armed self-defense. And in the 70s, Reagan introduced the racially toxic phrase welfare queen into the lexicon of American politics. If Richard Nixon opened up Pandora's box of racially coded political rhetoric that cemented the Republican Party's Southern strategy of appealing to white voters, turned off by talk of civil rights, busing, and urban rebellion, Reagan offered the entire nation a telegenic icon who professed to have no public feelings of racial animus, but an unflinching love for American exceptionalism and all of its accoutrements. So remember, Nixon referred to the African political Tanzanian delegation as cannibals, and Reagan referred to them as monkeys who were not used to wearing shoes. Reagan's racial politics proved to be both substantive and symbolic. His 1980 campaign appearance in Neshoba County, Mississippi, near the site of notorious murders of civil rights activists Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney in '64, signaled to white voters where his allegiance lay on matters of racial justice. The Reagan Revolution's reliance on trickle-down economics, promotion of the drug war in urban communities, and policy assault on the Great Society devastated poor black and brown communities who were unable to participate in the booming economy of the 1980s. Perhaps most infamously, Reagan inspired a new generation of political conservatives, from religious Christians to think tank academic ideologues to federal judges, who argued and struck down legal and legislative remedies that sought to promote racial justice in American democratic institutions. Appointing future Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas to the head, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission proved the tip of the iceberg for Reagan administration civil rights policies, which found the White House on the wrong side of virtually every single racial justice issue, from crime policy to racial apartheid in South Africa, except for one. Ronald Reagan signed the Martin Luther King Jr. federal holiday law into act in 1983, well aware that any veto would have been overridden by Congress. The national embrace of King, Martin Luther King, during the 80s under a president whose policies were antithetical to the civil rights leader's greatest political commitments and boldest reflex and dreams, an ever-present tension between race and democracy in America. Let me restate that. The national embrace of King during the 1980s under a president whose policies were antithetical to the civil rights leader's greatest political commitments and boldest dreams reflects an ever-present tension between race and democracy in America. Wow. So family, there will always be an underlying tension between us, and I'm only going to reference us, the so-called Black Americans, the American descendants of the enslaved. There will always be an underlying tension between us and democracy in America. Our existence is counter to the idea of democracy in America. The pursuit of life, liberty, and justice for all. All men are created equal. Whereas Reagan symbolically demonstrated his attention to the legacy of racial injustice through the passage of the King holiday, President Trump has gone in an entirely different direction. President Trump's recent visit to Jamestown, Virginia, where he extolled the virtues of democracy while virtually ignoring the labor of enslaved Africans who made colonial North America and its evolution into the United States possible, offers us the opportunity to re-examine that often fraught relationship between race and the presidency. Trump neither possesses President Nixon's voracious political instincts nor President Reagan's public air of dignified elegance. Yet, all three have more in common on race matters than many would care to admit. So family, as the political fervor increases, as these political campaigns and these debates are continuing, and the participants, the candidates are being weeded out, those of us, the Black Americans, should have a better observation at this time of a conscious recognition of us having a code, a mission, a singular demand. As we also increase the fever and the fervor of the reparations revolution, cut the check, mail it out, let's get it going. The overall manifestation of financial justice to the American descendants of slaves for the 250 years of institutional captivity and bondage, and another 100 and so plus years of informal Jim Crow segregation, discrimination, criminalization, dehumanization, degradation, incarceration, the destruction or the non-construction of an applicable spiritual and ethnic educational system for the affected population with the distinctive and unique history and lineage within the borders of the continental United States, until the economic justice is observed and performed. It will continue to be a spiritual debt with interest. So the minimum demand or price for the consideration or the retribution for the American descendants of the enslaved is the same amount of the increasing national debt. We should be a tax-exempt population. We should have educational exemption for payment to any higher institution of learning. We should have designated enclaves of safety and security and solitude from our oppressors. We need to undergo a mass and massive psychological reprogramming and reversal of this Stockholm spiritual syndrome, Willie Lynch programming attached to our American existence. Let it be done, so be it. And this is my contribution to the continuing revolution of the request and the demand, the expectation, and the application of reparations to the hidden and holy nation. So family, until we are together again, I love you. I love you. I love you. This is Revelations.Unveiled. Detroit.